Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Dee Dee Laugesen, Executive Secretary for the Committee on the Present Danger China. We appreciate your interest in our weekly webinars in which we expose and analyze the Chinese Communist Party's unrestricted warfare against America and the help being provided to the CCP in waging that warfare by captured U.S. elites. We encourage you to visit presentdangerchina.org for information on new programs, access to videos of our past webinars, and tons of other very valuable content. Please subscribe to our Substack at Present Danger China and follow us on X at CPD China. Our moderator today is Frank Gaffney. Frank is president of the Institute for the American Future, vice chairman of the Committee on the Present Danger China, and host of Securing America with Frank Gaffney on Real America's Voice Network.
Welcome, everyone, to this edition of our weekly webinar sponsored by the Committee on the Present Danger China, focused on issues that, of course, bear on the threat we face from the Chinese Communist Party, how that threat is manifesting itself, and who is helping metastasize the threat to the grave detriment of the American people and our country. It is the purpose, after all, of the Chinese Communist Party to destroy the United States of America for a host of reasons. We may get into them in the course of this program, not least of which is we are the impediment to the realization of the CCP's agenda, that is, global hegemony. And it has been greatly enabled, alas, in the course of the past 4 years under the Biden-Harris administration, an administration at least nominally presided over by a man who has been, by the testimony of one of our Committee on the Present Danger China colleagues, Sam Faddis, as a controlled asset of the Chinese Communist Party. That would be Joe Biden. What is of concern today, and will be the subject of this extraordinarily important webinar, is what Joe Biden, or the people running him, the people presiding over the government of the United States, acting as though they are Joe Biden and president, are up to, that is perhaps directly tied to actions sought by the Chinese Communist Party, or at a minimum, is highly beneficial to their agenda of taking down this country. The context for this particular conversation, and I hasten to add that I think all of these webinars are very important, and we strongly encourage everyone to subscribe to them at presentdangerchina.org. They're available for free. If you're subscribed, you won't miss any. You'll have access to all of them. And we think you will benefit greatly from taking advantage of this resource. But this one is of surpassing importance, in my judgment, because it talks about a particularly fraught moment in our nation's history. The next few weeks, just over a month, are a period in which the transition from the Biden presidency to the Trump 2.0 presidency is essentially hanging fire. President-elect Trump has engaged very actively in a variety of affairs of state, even though he is not yet president. Joe Biden has been making policies, or people, again, acting in his name, even though he is scarcely, if at all, president of the United States. And the trouble is, and I think it is a very, very grave trouble indeed, there may well be people, certainly outside of the U.S. government, and quite possibly some inside as well, who would prefer to see a continuation for some indefinite period of the present arrangement and a postponement, perhaps indefinitely, of the return to power of Donald J. Trump. That is certainly not the view of, I think, patriotic Americans who expect what Joe Biden promised President Trump on the 7th of November, which was a peaceful and orderly transition. And he charged his entire administration to help bring that about. What we will explore with some of the country's best experts in their respective areas is what is being done actually that is a threat to that orderly and peaceful transition, and that may indeed conduce to very serious problems, perhaps even jeopardizing the timely conduct of the inauguration of Donald Trump for the second time. I did want to shamelessly flog an article that was just published by me on the Gatestone Institute website today about the possible coming chaos in this window. And again, we're going to have considerable evidence of why that is not an idle concern, why indeed it is one that we should be very, very focused on. And personally, as I try to lay out in this article, taking steps to, try to minimize the possibilities of such chaos being imposed upon us by enemies, foreign and possibly domestic, in this very short and closing window. We're going to begin our conversation at this point with people who are, as I say, bringing to us information that further, I think, underscores the importance of this situational awareness, if you will, and the adoption of those sorts of steps. And I'll go over them at the end, I think, to just summarize what we're coming up with here. Our first presenter is a dear friend, Ben Berquist. You know him for his extraordinary and courageous reporting about what has been happening at the U.S. borders, what specifically the Biden-Harris administration has wrought there in the way of immense numbers of illegal immigrants pouring across those borders, some processed in a form or fashion or another, many of them gotaways, and a considerable number of them very relevant to this topic who seem to be here to do us harm. Ben is, as I say, a reporter with Real America's Voice. Proud to say the host of our show, Securing America. His show there and podcast is entitled Law and Border. And we are always delighted when he's able to join us, as it happens at the moment, from a well-deserved vacation. And we thank you very much, Ben, for taking the time to visit with us a little bit about what's happening at the moment at the border and what it portends possibly for this transitional period.
Thanks, Frank. Yeah, great to be with you guys. Well, I just got back. I just finished a first of its kind border tour with myself and my colleague, Oscar Blue Ramirez. We did a 10-day starting in Mexico City. We drove and hit all 8 ports of entry on the Mexico side that are still inviting. It's called the CBP-1, Customs and Border Protection 1 app. It's the ubiquitous app of illegal immigration. And it's what Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and the Democrat string pullers came up with to hide the part of the invasion from the American people. So for anyone who's wondering, yes, CBP-1 is still in full effect. In fact, yesterday in Tijuana, we finished up that Mexico border tour in Tijuana, and it was the worst I've seen it down there. There's 3 groups a day going through 5 a.m., 8 a.m., and 1 p.m. And so it's continuing at full pace. And this is now, it's everybody. So you've got people from Venezuela, from people that claim to be from Haiti, but really they're from Brazil and Chile. They've lived in Brazil and Chile for sometimes upwards of a decade, but now they got the word that the gates are open. But huge numbers from the Middle East and also large numbers from China. So there are people coming in from all different directions. It's still continuing. But the when it comes to national security, when it comes to our homeland and what's happening within our own country, the impact that that's having is more of a distraction from what's happening elsewhere in other parts of the border. And so we also made several stops in heavy cartel area. Now, the entire country of Mexico is basically a narco cartel state. There's, everywhere is basically being fought over for turf, depending on which cartels, whether you're Zetas or the Sinaloa or the CGNG, or there's a dozen different smaller subsidiaries, the Gulf cartels. And so they're battling over turf. And everywhere in these areas where Border Patrol has been pulled off the line are wide open for trafficking of people that don't want to get caught. And we actually stopped by, I'll just show you one of my souvenirs from this trip. I have multiple pairs of these, but these are what are known as carpet shoes. They are, for people that haven't seen them, they put them over their feet, their shoes, so that when you walk in the desert, it's harder for Border Patrol to track you. And these are sold. There's actually an entire market now of illegal immigration directed to the cartel. All the little towns along the border. I bought these in Sonoita, right across from Lukeville, Arizona. But basically every little town along the border has some standard, some form of these shoes. A whole swath of camouflage that you can buy and everything you need to come across illegally. And that's really, when we talk about the danger in America, it's not the ones that are coming in that we've let in, although they are a danger. We know the terrorists have been caught coming in pretending to be someone that they're not. We have people that are coming across with the CBP-1, or simply you still can walk across illegally into America, turn yourself in, and we're allowing you to come in. You can make up any name you want unless you show up on one of our databases, criminal databases, and we'll send you wherever you want to go. So that's still happening. That's why we still find IDs everywhere along the border. But the worst of the worst, the ones that may show up on a list, know that, and so they go in areas like this across the desert. Also on the northern border, we have more terrorists coming in, potential terrorists coming in on the northern border, because we've spent so much of our time and resources on the southern border. And just to give you an idea, I've got a colleague up in Maine who reached out to me and is saying that the Triad, the Chinese criminal syndicate, the Triads, are actually taking over turf up in Maine. We still have that. I'm visiting family in California. There is a large Triad contingency here in California that's fighting the Mexican cartels for drug turf, for marijuana grow turf, and for drug processing turf. So that's happening in California. That's happening in Maine. It's happening in states all over our country. And it would be similar to, we hear about the Plan de Aragua out of Venezuela, this street gang out of Venezuela. Triads are coming in similar to the street gangs of Venezuela, but it's really the other syndicates behind that are really the bigger threat. And so in Venezuela, it's the Solis cartel, who is allied with Iran and Hezbollah. In fact, they've gotten their tunnel digging technology in some of these places like Juarez from the Solis cartel, working with Hezbollah. Similarly, the Chinese that are coming in, obviously that's driven by the CCP and foreign assets within the Chinese Communist Party. And all of that is happening under the backdrop or the umbrella of, as you said, as Sam Faddis has said, a president who is sold out, lost, complicit, corrupted by not just I believe the cartels of Mexico, but also the CCP. And you can tell that by some of the pardons he's decided to do. And we're really, we're just in the beginning stages of starting to deal with what's going to come from what has happened over these last 4 years. So when it comes to what's next for President Trump, what's happening in this transition period, for one, two things I'll say. This Biden administration regime is not pulling off the gas. They're not putting on the brakes. They are all gas, no brakes, all the way up until January 20th on this invasion. What we're seeing is it seems to be designed to bring in more and more people that then can, the media, the mainstream media, that can turn around and say, well, you can't deport these people, these poor women and children. The first woman I saw again, we hit all 8 ports of entry, starting in Matamoros, Mexico, ending in Tijuana. The first woman I interviewed was a 9-month pregnant woman who was coming across to have a baby in America. Well, The mainstream media is going to say you can't deport that woman and the man that comes with her because that baby is now an American citizen. So this is being done by design, by the left. And the other side of that is what's happening all the way up through this with all the other parts, with all the other areas of our border, inviting in the worst of the worst for our country to have to deal with later. And now this is going to be, the onus is going to be on President Trump, on Tom Homan, but even more so on the American people, in particular on media like ours, Real America's Voice News. Obviously, you, Frank, and the great work you're doing and the coalition's doing. It's going to be on us to counteract the fake news mainstream narrative, because this is already, we're already infected. I mean, you look at our universities, you look at the Confucius Institutes. I think about it as the analogy of the soft bigotry of low expectations. Well, we have the soft tyranny of low security standards in America right now, and it's intentional. Everything you see is intentional. Now, Joe Biden may not know why he's doing it, but the people that are pulling his strings certainly do.
Fabulous report, Ben. And again, thank you for the courage that you display every single day, being in the front lines of this fight and speaking truthfully about it, including sometimes from behind enemy lines. God bless you. And I hope if you can stay with us, we look forward to having some questions. If not, enjoy your time with your family, and Merry Christmas to you. We're going to hear next about what may be one of the upshots of what is being done with these illegal immigrants who have come in large numbers, as we've been talking about, exceedingly large numbers at that, including in particular with Chinese nationals, many of whom, as we've heard, turn out to be characterized by a certain demographic, unaccompanied fighting age men from communist China. Our next presenter has been studying reports that we've received from Jennifer Zhang, among others, I think, about a U.S. Navy recruiting center in Alhambra, California. His name is Captain James Fennell, United States Navy retired, a distinguished naval intelligence officer. He was the chief of intelligence for the U.S. Pacific Fleet prior to his retirement. He has remained one of the great experts on the Chinese Communist Party, its military capabilities and designs, as well as one of the most prolific commentators on it, helping the rest of us understand what we are confronting. Captain, it's great to have you with us, sir, as always. Thank you for doing it in person. We look forward to your analysis of what is actually going on with our Navy and this recruiting center in California.
Well, good evening, Frank, and honor to be with everybody, and appreciate again Ben Berquam and all that he does, as you mentioned. Great reporting. This specific issue that you've mentioned refers to a report that was posted on X by Jennifer Zhang on 11 December, and it essentially is 3 videos that show the outside of a U.S. Navy and a U.S. Marine Corps recruiting office. The Marine Corps is called a primary contact station for the 12th Marine Recruiting District in Southern California and Los Angeles Basin in the city of San Gabriel, Alhambra. And the videos show the outside, the exterior of the building, and that's been verified through other sources, Google Earth, that shows that this is really a real recruiting station for the Navy and the Marine Corps. And then the third video is about 3 minutes long, and it shows the interior of the Navy side. And what you see is a series of U.S. Navy petty officers in U.S. Navy uniforms, correctly attired, that are all Chinese nationals. And then what you see is the interviews or discussions amongst these recruiting petty officers and recruits that have come in. And all the recruits are Chinese nationals, and they're using the mainland dialect. And so the video shows them appearing to be mainland Chinese that are somehow in the United States, that are joining the United States Navy. And 2 of the individuals that were discussed and interacted with were 35 and 37 years old, and they wanted to join the Navy. And on the exterior of the doors of the Navy recruiting center, there's some posters up in English and in Chinese, basically saying that you can join the fast track to citizenship, green card, temporary green cards, join in the U.S. Marine Corps Reserve. It does not force you to become a citizen. You can maintain your permanent green card status, and it talks about the benefits, health benefits, pay, and all of this. So this is very, very disturbing if it's true. And so there's people that are still right now, I know I've been contacted by several journalists over the last couple of days that are actually researching this to validate that this video that it's been taken, is it real or not? Or is this something different? If it's real, then we have serious questions about what U.S. Navy leadership has been doing. We have to wonder if the legislation that was discussed by Senator Dick Durbin and Tammy Duckworth in December of last year, recommending that, as they called it, unlawful, illegal persons could enlist in the U.S. Armed Forces, which we would call illegal aliens. They discussed that. And so you have to wonder what the Biden administration had been doing and direction given from the commander-in-chief to the Department of Defense to actually increase our roles, because you recall in 2023, recruiting was way down, 10,000 in the Air Force, 6,000 in the Navy. So there was recruiting problems in 2023, and it's possible that there was a push to have illegal aliens come into the armed forces. But we have recruited from non-citizens going back throughout my career, but I think this is something that is of concern. Now, let me offer up another alternative, which is to say, what happens if this video, the exterior is real, but maybe the video was fake? The translations were in simplified Mandarin, which is a traditional Mandarin, which is for folks from Taiwan to look at. So there is a thing called cognitive domain operations. The Pentagon talks about it, CDO, or cognitive warfare. And this idea of essentially taking the three warfares, which is information warfare, psychological warfare, and legal warfare, and ramping it up with digital, artificial intelligence, cyber capabilities. And so is this a deep fake? And is it something that's been made by PRC cyber operators and cognitive warfare operatives in the mainland, that it's been fused and put into the internet to essentially demoralize the people of Taiwan that we're allegedly preparing to defend should the PRC invade Taiwan? Either way, if this is a cognitive warfare operation and a deep fake, once again, the Department of Defense should be aware of this and should be swatting it down and debunking it and making sure that people in Taiwan, people in America, understand that PRC mainland nationals of fighting age men can't enlist in the U.S. Navy or Marine Corps. So either way, we have a problem, and it needs to be clarified. And this follows another video about a week before, which was from an Army, showed in an Army office, an active duty Army NCO who was from mainland China. And he said if the U.S. and China got into a fight, he wouldn't fight. He would quit the military because he wouldn't want to fight the Chinese mainland. So we have some serious problems right now inside the Department of Defense. I know some people would say that's an exaggeration, alarmist, but I would say it is something at a minimum that, because it's out there in the internet, and you can't address everything, but this is getting a lot of traction amongst the folks that follow these things from Asia. It needs to be addressed, and we need to have validation of what's going on. And my concern is that we have had people come in and infiltrate inside the DoD, and if they're serving on board our ships at sea or in our aircraft, what are they doing with our weapon systems? What bugs have they put in, or other things of that nature? And beyond just the obvious intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance work that they're doing to gain information about the capabilities of the U.S. military. So I think it's a one-off story, but it's something worth following and making ourselves aware. And I'll just add, I had a conversation with the retired U.S. Navy Admiral before coming on, and he's been doing some work for DoD on the role that U.S. intelligence can play in helping President Trump as he comes in terms of providing intelligence collection and surveillance operations to help us guard our borders. And his word to me was, the Chinese have us surrounded on all sides, on our southern border and our northern border, and into our ports on both coasts. So we're at risk, and we need to pay attention to it. And as Ben said, this is by design. This isn't happenstance. It's not just entropy.
Captain Fennell, thank you. This was extraordinarily important. If I understood you correctly, you're not taking a position on whether it's real or a deep fake at this point. You're eliciting some kind of confirmation from the Defense Department. Have I got that right?
Yes, I'm not siding either way. I just want to get an answer. So I'm really trying to raise this. And so I appreciate the opportunity to put on this forum and get the answers that we need.
Well, we appreciate your bringing it to our attention and assessing it as best one can under the circumstances. But it does seem as though this is an example of something we'll be talking more about, that the administration is not coming forward with information that will help us make sense of what is at best an anomaly and at worst a very serious indicator of a problem. We'll talk more about this, Jim, if you can stick with us when we get to the Q&A. We're going to hear next from a man whose insights into politics are profound. They've been informed by personal involvement in some 300 campaigns over his career, from the presidency on down. He served on Capitol Hill in both the House and the Senate. He's worked for the Vice President of the United States. He has been, for some time now, the editor-in-chief of a terrific online resource, Conservative HQ, Richard Viguery's newsletter. His name is George Racely. He is a member, as is Captain Fennell, of our Committee on the Present Danger China. We're always delighted to have him with us. We specifically wanted him to speak to two issues that have gotten some attention, but not frankly as much clarity as it seems should be in order at a moment like this. One has to do with the various pardons that Joe Biden has issued, starting with his son and now a large group of some unsavory sorts, as well as some that seem to be in prospectively, no less. We'll hear from him about that and possible plans by the left to prevent the certification of Donald Trump's election. The various states have been certifying over the past few hours, but it all comes together on January 6th, as we know. George Racely, welcome back, sir. It's good to have you with us. The floor is yours.
It is a pleasure to be here and to hear Ben and Jim's presentations. Biden pardons actually fit somewhat with what Jim was talking about, in that in an unprecedented move, President Biden, or I should say alleged President Biden, pardoned several communist Chinese spies. And this is completely unprecedented. Hadn't been done actually since Calvin Coolidge, post-World War I, pardoned a German spy. So this is almost 100 years since a president pardoned a foreign spy. But the larger group that he pardoned, some 1,500, which includes pedophiles, drug dealers, cartel operatives of various sorts, is only a small piece of his total pardons, sort of unrecognized in the media coverage of the tranche of pardons that were just released, is that Joe Biden has pardoned over 8,000 individuals. And they run the gamut of, as we just talked about, the spies, through a host of serious drug criminals, pornographers, pedophiles, et cetera, et cetera. So one has to ask themselves if there isn't some unspoken quid pro quo going on here between these drug cartels and the Biden administration. But the second most pardons up to this time, or the most up to this time, was by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And I wish I had Biden and Obama's teleprompter handy because there's so many numbers and what have you to keep track of. But it's just astonishing that this vast number of serious criminals have been pardoned, many with connections to transnational organizations that have ill will towards the United States. One of the other things that's hit the media, which again is unprecedented, is various and sundry Democrats and Democrat-aligned politicians suddenly asking for pardons for the crimes that they have been denying they committed. And so you have people like Liz Cheney and various others suggesting that they should have a prospective pardon. Such pardons, again, are unprecedented in our history. We have really only seen one prospective pardon that I could think of, which was Gerald Ford's pardon of then former President Richard Nixon in the aftermath of Nixon's resignation. So clearly unprecedented, and kind of begs the question, if these guys have been saying for 4 years that former president, soon to be president again, Trump was the criminal, why are they the ones that need the pardons? But I have to say that if you're looking for a pardon, I'm not a member of the bar. This is not legal advice, but certainly the door is open for a lot of very, very serious criminals to receive pardons. And I'm not just in that case talking about drug dealers and pedophiles, but people who have committed serious political crimes, such as vote fraud, abuse of power, et cetera, to be pardoned as Joe Biden goes out the door.
Thank you very much, George. Did you want to say a word about Jamie Raskin and his pronounced to make sure the certification doesn't take place?
Yeah, let me talk about that a little bit, Frank. Red diaper baby Jamie Raskin, son of avowed communist Marcus Raskin, probably the most despicable human being serving in Congress today, and that's saying a lot. But he has called for Civil War conditions to be implemented when President Trump takes office. He has said that he intends to mobilize not just hundreds or thousands, but millions to participate in these Civil War conditions. And he has said that they should be ready to fight. And he didn't limit that to fight in the courts of law or at the ballot box, by the way. Raskin and his fellow travelers tend to see the Constitution as something to be gotten around as opposed to the law that governs government. So it will be very interesting to see exactly how they pursue this. And I think we should all be very aware and very, very careful in the days leading up to and following President Trump's inauguration. It's worth noting that the riots and the attempted arson in Portland by Antifa and other far left anarchist organizations started the day after President Trump was elected in 2016, and they went on for 4 solid years. Raskin seems to indicate that his goal is to spread those kind of riots across the country as part of his so-called resistance movement. Beyond that, it'll be very interesting to see exactly what kind of legal moves Raskin and other similarly minded Democrats might make, because they've spent the last 4 years hounding, indicting, trying to bankrupt through lawfare various Republicans who participated in President Trump's 2020 challenge. And so, we shouldn't be surprised at the level of hypocrisy that Democrats engage in these matters. For example, if they want to challenge President Trump's certification on the 6th of January, or challenged any of those electors, they need an alternate slate of electors. Well, they've spent the last 4 years saying that such an alternate slate of electors is election denialism, totally new word they coined, and that the people who put their names up as alternative electors should be in jail for some sort of weird fraud that nobody ever saw before. I expect that they're going to run a very active, very vigorous playbook against President Trump's inauguration and in the immediate aftermath to begin to stir this civil war conditions that Raskin has called for and predicted.
Has he described what he means by that term, civil war conditions? Is that conditions that would apply in the event we have a civil war, or is it a reference to the last civil war?
Well, my interpretation of what he said, and I'd be happy to be, corrected, straightened out, disabused of this, is that he wants the people who see the world as he does to fight. And he didn't limit that, as I said, to fighting in the ballot box or in the news media or anything else. So while not specifically calling for an armed insurrection, if you get millions of people to fight, they got to fight somebody with something.
George, thank you. And this is especially fraught, as I said earlier, given the very, very, very narrow margin of control of the House in which this will be fought out, if I can use that expression, the certification, that is. George, thank you. If you can stick around, we'll have some questions I know for you. We have next a man who has devoted much of his professional life to energy security. He is, I think, one of the most thoughtful monitors of what is taking place at the hands of the Biden-Harris administration, specifically in undermining the energy security of the United States, as well as benefiting, it turns out, enormously the industries and aspirations of the Chinese Communist parties. His name is Dave Welsh. He has been in senior positions in America's energy sector. Notably, he ran the Mitsubishi Power Group. He is also these days a partner in the Dakota Group, a consulting firm. And he has been incredibly generous with his time on these webinars, my program, Steve Bannon's, and others, as he tries to, again, raise awareness about what is being done to one of the pillars of our national security, namely our energy independence, what was our energy dominance, and now is something we're trying to hold on to, energy security. Dave, thanks so much for taking time today. We're very appreciative of your willingness to shed some light on what the Biden-Harris administration has been doing in this transitional period to try to lock in our energy insecurity, despite Donald Trump's determined efforts and his mandate to reverse all that. To you, sir.
Well, thank you, Frank. Well, the administration has a Project Warp Speed underway to spend as rapidly as possible before Inauguration Day, if possible, all of the Biden IRA money. The IRA was appropriately identified by Biden more recently as an environmental act for net zero decarbonization. So this morning we have an announcement that $15 billion in a loan commitment guarantee, loan support will be made to Pacific Gas and Electric to enable their procurement of solar panels, inverters, batteries, and other Chinese-sourced materials for creating their net zero decarbonized future. Yesterday, a $9.6 billion grant to Ford Motors battery facility for an electric vehicle factory was granted in terms of more IRA money. And then along the way in the last month, the administration's announced $100 billion of disbursements to NGOs for more getting out solar, wind, battery storage into communities across NGOs who support all of these kinds of programs, which at their core involve the procurement of Chinese thin film PV for solar. They make 87% of the solar panels in the world. They also make about 97% of the lithium-ion battery processing occurs in the world in China for that aspect of green energy. So all these programs are about supporting the Chinese economy, but more importantly, from here, the standpoint here, also creating massively expensive electricity costs for U.S. citizens. And these programs, as they continue, we've even had authors from the Republican delegation in Congress beseeching in writing Speaker Johnson to let these programs continue. Let's not have the new administration get in the way of ending solar, wind, battery storage incentives, because ending them would be ruinous to the economy, according to a number of our Republican delegation in Congress who've signed over a letter to Speaker Johnson claiming that these programs can't be eliminated. So it shows you the depths to which the Chinese have gone in compromising government figures on both sides of the aisle to assure that these programs continue across the new administration. So we're going to have to look at more draconian means to put an end to this, up to and including, for example, the Federal Power Act of 1935 basically delegates electricity pricing authority and price and production authority to the states through their various public service commissions and governors to basically control electrification in the country, not by the federal government. So in fact, it's actually in a form illegal that the federal government step in and heavily subsidize a fuel of choice, be it renewables, be it batteries, wind, solar, and pick and choose to go ahead and subsidize electrification, hide the true cost of that energy, therefore eliminating any notionality of efficient behavior among consumers, but with the government basically picking up the tab for 30 to 35% of energy production devices through incentives. So we're going to have to look at many more draconian steps to empower the judicial branch to step in, given that Congress, with our present very skinny majority, and already a number of folks on record that they want these programs continued from the Republican side. We have to take other means now at this stage to thwart the adoption of these very, very low energy density devices coming from China that actually cost 6 to 11 times more money for ratepayers as you're transferring American natural gas for power over to offshore capital cost equipment that's 5 to 11 times more expensive into the energy system to produce electricity, looking at things like the reduction of the monopoly status of utilities who continue to do this, promoting shortages of electricity, promoting the high cost of it, as opposed to the benefit of the bargain that they had in being granted monopolies in the first place by states to apply abundant energy in all quantities possible and at a low cost and on a reliable basis to consumers. All things utilities are now not doing as they're rapidly procuring battery storage, solar and wind power that is intermittent, part-time, and creating a massive shortage of baseload electricity in the country. So, the administration continues now to, one of their officials commented, throwing gold bricks off the deck of the ship in terms of their zeal to spend out as much of the $1.5 billion IRA as they possibly can between now and inauguration day. So a very, very, very sad state of affairs underway presently.
Dave, thank you. I've heard this presentation in varying levels of detail and length, and you've summarized very powerfully the challenge that we're facing here and the ability the Chinese have now to exploit it shamelessly. So thank you for equipping us to understand this piece of what's happening in this transitional period, especially. We're going to hear next from overseas, a colleague who is, as it happens, not just monitoring some challenging developments in his own country, the United Kingdom, but also here. In particular, one that got my attention recently, and we've had a chance to talk with Peter McAvena a bit about it, namely something called the Corporate Transparency Act, and what it would impose upon us, the vast, I guess, majority of small and middle-sized business executives and owners and companies in particular. And in a conversation I had with him for our show yesterday, Securing America, he laid out what the Biden administration is trying to do to overcome a temporary injunction by a federal judge in Texas that has kept this very onerous law with some very ominous implications from coming into effect on the 1st of January, which is the statutory direction. We asked Peter to shed light on all of this and how it fits into this idea of trying to use this transitional period to ram home some very, very problematic initiatives. Peter, thank you for joining us. Welcome back to this webinar series. It's good to have you.
Thank you, Frank. I have felt a bit like a voice in the wilderness and wondered if actually this was the right issue to go down. And I thank God that Vivek Ramaswamy posted about this the end of last week, and he has got it. And it's the Corporate Transparency Act, which I would say is the most aggressive domestic spying program since the Patriot Act. Basically, that's what it is. And it is that every US company, small and medium-sized businesses, need to register with FinCEN. And in case you didn't know what FinCEN is, you're probably similar to most Americans and every non-American. It's a financial crimes enforcement network. And yes, the Biden administration wants you to register your company with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Now, let me pick up a few of these things. This was President Trump vetoed this in beginning December 2019, and he saw this for what it was. Capitol Hill Republicans and Democrats pushed this through, and this has been a law since the 1st of January 2024, I believe, and every business must register by the 1st of January 2025 on pain of, if you don't comply, up to 2 years in jail and fines of $591 a day. Now, my understanding is small businesses register at the state level, and this, therefore, is no business of the federal government. Yet the federal government have decided that every small business, that is a business up to 5 million turnover each year and up to 20 employees, they must now register. 32 million US businesses must now register with the brand new database on FinCEN. Now, there's been pushback on this. The main pushback has been to individuals in the Senate. So let me touch on that. Tommy Tuberville, who I've seen actually for the first time on War Room, and the other one is Congressman Warren Davison. So Senator Tommy Tuberville says the Corporate Transparency Act is big government overreach at its worst. The Biden Treasury Department is attempting to create a database on every American business owner. Failure to register by the end of the year could land you in jail. This unprecedented intrusion into personal privacy must be stopped. You'd expect this sort of thing in communist China, but not in the United States of America. I am proud to be partnering with Congressman Warren Davison in introducing a bill to repeal the Corporate Transparency Act. And the bill is the Big Brother Overreach Act. Congressman Warren Davison said the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network is violating the personal privacy of American business owners by forcing them to disclose sensitive information. The Corporate Transparency Act must be appealed. And my concern was that this was not on the radar of the administration, because for the election, it was the economy, it was immigration. That's completely understandable. But seeing when Vivek posted this a few days ago, that gave me heart that actually there can be pushback. And Frank mentioned that the Texas court ruled on, I think it was the 3rd of December, let me get, the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Texas entered a preliminary injunction suspending enforcement of the Corporate Transparency Act and its implementation of regulations nationwide. So up until a month ago, only 11% of businesses had gone through this registration process. And my concern is there's a whole industry which has come up on that. And a lot of conservatives I've heard from have said, well, we need to comply and, we need to pay for this, pay for you to do your accounts. But Vivek said, look, this is going to be minimum 11 hours of work for every small business. And why should they have to register with this? Now, the FinCEN have pushed back. They've pushed back on this, and there's a whole list from the 3rd of December up until the 17th today, and they've appealed this. They've appealed for this to be stayed. So at the moment, this is in a state of flux. But at the moment, business owners do not need to register with this database. Now, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, there are a whole lot of areas. Let me touch on one or two before we finish. But it was set up, according to its website, to combat domestic and international money laundering, terrorist financing, and other financial crimes. What has international money laundering got to do with a small business in the US? Terrorist financing, what has that got to do with a small business in the US? This is to cut off the economic lifeblood of the US economy. This is to destroy what makes America great. And I say as a UK citizen, because in the UK, small business owners are what the UK is built on. And it is a similar story in the US. And this is to target those small business owners. Where does that information go and who holds this? Well, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, it sits under the Treasury, but its parent organisation is the Office of Terrorism and Financial Intelligence. Why should small business owners register with the Office of Terrorism? It seems to be you're guilty until you're proved innocent. So this is the push. The Biden administration is pushing for this. They are legally pushing for this to go through. But there are a whole lot of other areas in terms of data and where this goes. So FinCEN is part of a network of 147 financial intelligence units. They all sit under the Egmont Group. The Egmont Group was based originally, well, it was started in Brussels, but now is in Canada. And now all these 147, of which FinCEN is the US one, the UK have one, every country more or less has one. Those come together and they share this information, which is based in Canada. And the Canadian equivalent of FinCEN at the beginning of this year had a massive hack. No one knows what's happened to that data. And my concern, looking at this, is that this information is held in the Egmont Group. I'm sure none of the viewers and listeners have heard of the Egmont Group. I certainly hadn't heard of them. And they hold this data. And if there's a massive data link on the Canadian authorities, where's that information gone? Has it been bought and sold on the dark web? Are all business owners, will they all be open to abuse, to blackmail, to selling their data? What happens? And no one has come up with an idea of how secure this information is. So my issues are massive overreach of the federal government. They've no right to ask for this information. Why should you have to upload your personal and business information to them? What are they going to do? Why do they need this database? No one has ever said this is not about terrorism. This is not about money laundering. This, I believe, is about targeting small businesses and conservative businesses. And thank God for Senator Tommy Tuberville and for Vivek for speaking up against this. And I'm hoping and praying this becomes an issue the administration really move on to protect small businesses from this massive overreach.
Thank you so much, Peter. As you say, for the moment, we have a stay of execution. It certainly is not a commutation of sentence. I guess the question is, might the Biden administration succeed in getting that stay lifted by the appeals court before President Trump takes office, and thereby puts in motion all of these reporting requirements and the onerousness of those and the potential for intelligence to be collected on American citizens unnecessarily and potentially dangerously.
Up to 2 years in jail, $591 a day. That's the implication, the punishment.
Very profound indeed. Thank you, Peter. We're going to talk next about an issue that has been mentioned a lot of late. We've asked a man who has extensive experience in things that fly. He is a pilot. He has commanded a bomber squadron in the United States Air Force. He has been, among other things, the commander of a very sensitive national security facility, Kirtland Air Force Base, out in New Mexico. He is a Mustang as well, by the way, and a man who rose through the ranks from an enlisted person to a full bird colonel. His name is Colonel Rob Maness, United States Air Force retired, another member of our Committee on the Present Danger China, and a great resource to talk about what we are to make of the conduct, yes, of people who are flying drones in this country at the moment, predominantly in the East Coast. Been some of it in the UK too, Peter, as you know, but we're particularly concerned about protracted overflights taking place a year or so ago over very, very sensitive facilities in the Virginia Beach, Langley Air Force Base area in Virginia, as well as more recently in New Jersey and other parts of the country. And it's troubling that we have this kind of behavior taking place, but even more troubling in a way that we've been given no real answers as to what is going on and at whose hands. And Rob Maness has been giving this a lot of thought and study, and he's kind enough to come aboard to share his insights with us. And we welcome you, Colonel. Over to you.
Well, thank you, Frank. It's a pleasure to be with my esteemed colleagues and you to discuss this. The drone issue and who is doing it, it shouldn't really surprise anyone, especially people like the wing commander at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio, who closed the airspace around the airfield for 4 hours due to unidentified unmanned air vehicles operating in an uncontrolled manner over the base just last Friday night. Our friend Sam Pattis has documented a lot of these things in his latest article from And magazine. And if you just go take a look at that, you really should, because in July of this year, a Chinese national grad student was convicted for taking drone footage of where Huntington Ingalls Industries in Newport News shipbuilding right there in Southern Virginia. The guy was flying a unmanned aircraft outside of the entrance of the Huntington Ingalls Newport News facility, and it got stuck in a tree, luckily. And a neighbor came over to see if it could help him, and the guy asked where he was at. And he said, "Well, I'm from China." And the neighbor called the police, and rightly so. But the card that was on the drone captured footage and pictures of U.S. Navy vessels and, of course, vessels that are being constructed that were being built for the U.S. Navy. This arrest, as you mentioned, came just after 17 days straight multiple drones, one of them a fixed-wing drone that's believed to have been the command and control aircraft that was almost 20 feet long, flying over Langley Air Force Base in Virginia. And that's the home of the 1st Fighter Wing, our F-22 fighter wing. It's the premier fighter wing. It's the home of the headquarters of the Air Force's largest and only really dedicated combat command, the Air Combat Command. And this guy... So he shows up in early January after the December incident at Langley Air Force Base, straight from San Francisco. He also flew his drone over BAE Systems shipyard in early January, and fortunately was rolled up when he got his drone stuck in a tree. That's really unbelievable, but there's more. This is not the first incident of drones out at Vandenberg Space Force Base, where it's a highly sensitive space launch facility that launches military satellite space rockets, NASA space vehicles, military intercontinental ballistic missile testing is done there, where we take our mission-ready missiles out of their holes in the missile fields and take the whole crew, including the security and maintenance forces and command and control, and we fire those missiles with a telemetry package on it to demonstrate to countries like China and Russia and any other nuclear-armed country that our ICBMs are very, very capable and safe and secure and reliable. So these individuals were flying this drone, and they were caught. One individual came in previously to the United States, and another one had just arrived from China. And the individual took photos of the base's layout, which is against the law. The base's drone detection systems did alert on the drone flying overhead, and this was on November 30th. It flew overhead for an hour, was at an altitude of about 6,000 feet above ground level or so, and base security personnel found the individuals at this park where they were at, and the other Chinese man, and they arrested them, and they were later, they're held now and are going to be charged with these violations of crimes. But, you know, that's not the only one. Sam points out in his article that U.S. Navy aircraft carriers in South Korea at their home port there, the Teddy Roosevelt, and U.S. Navy aircraft carriers at their home ports in Japan have all had footage and photographs taken of them by Chinese operators, and these have shown up on Chinese social media in recent days. And that's not the only thing. They've also had their drones flying over Japanese Navy ships that are under construction, being modified. One of their ships is being modified to become a full aircraft carrier from just a helicopter carrier. And that video and those stills have shown up over social media. So this is not unusual. We should know who is doing this. We do know who is doing this. And this is linked to all of these Chinese military males of fighting age that Ben Berquam and his team have so consistently reported on, Frank. And that linkage has put America at really high risk internally in what I call Fortress America for really the first time on a massive scale. And this reporting most recently out of New Jersey, and then the incident at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base Friday night, these have become commonplace, everyday reporting, and we are doing nothing about it. And my biggest concern is that it's not just drones. Chinese nationals have tried to gain entrance to places like Fort Wainwright in Alaska. They've been caught scuba diving near the Key West Military Intelligence Facility off the shore there, scuba diving off of Kennedy Space Center. So it's a multi-domain attempt to spy on our most sensitive facilities. They are infiltrating these facilities, both with these drones and with human beings, conducting human intelligence operations. And what is our Defense Department saying? Well, no restricted airspace has been violated. And I just talked about the airspace over Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Now, Wright-Patterson is the home of some of our most sophisticated research and development operations for our military Air Force equipment. And it is very important that security be maintained, not just on the ground there, but over the airspace to prevent this type of infiltration, because it does become a threat very, very quickly. Because as we've seen in the war in Ukraine and the Middle East recently with drone warfare, these things can be modified to carry anything from bioweapons to kinetic explosives. And I think I'll land my talk there, Frank, and stand by for questions.
Yeah, a bunch that arise. So thank you for doing so, Ron. That's a wonderful, albeit chilling, overview of what's happening both on the ground and in the air in some of our most, as we've been discussing, sensitive places. We're going to turn our attention to another part of the world, one that is very much in the news at the moment as well, to take stock of some other things that are going on that seem to have in common with what we've been discussing, a determined effort by the Biden administration to lock in policies and realities on the ground in the Middle East before Donald Trump comes to office and perhaps changes the course of American policy towards that region, quite possibly very dramatically. Dr. David Wormser is our duty expert for the purpose. David is a senior analyst for the Middle East at the Center for Security Policy, a man with considerable experience, both as a naval intelligence officer and in senior positions at the State Department, the National Security Council, and in the Office of the Vice President of the United States. And he's one of the people that we prize for his clarity and his insights as to what is happening to our friends in Israel and in the neighborhood more generally, and what it all means for us. And we've asked David to do a quick assessment of what, again, is taking place in a moment when the transition is underway from policies that I think it's fair to say have been repudiated by American voters and are nonetheless continue to be propounded and maybe indeed made permanent. David, we're very delighted to have you with us. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Frank. Yeah, we have, around 35 to 40 days left until the administration switches over to the Trump administration. And it's not a lot of time, but it's enough time to do a lot of damage. And one of the things that I've been focusing on, there's really two baskets of things that I would focus on in the Middle East in terms of the damage that they're going to do. And it does involve the Chinese quite a bit. The first one is the usual stuff, UN resolutions. I'm afraid that we may see a UN resolution that declares the territorial integrity of Syria to be absolute, which of course ignores what the Turks are doing in the north, but is really focused on the tiny little Israeli security area that they've taken over from the UN disengagement zone, and maybe a little bit more than that. Just to remind, Israel in 1973, when it was attacked, took territory in Syria after initially being defeated badly on the Golan Heights. They turned it around and they wound up only about 15 miles from Damascus. So there was a large bulge of the Golan Heights in the north and a little bit in the south. After 73, Israel gave that up for an agreement, a disengagement agreement, which allowed for a disengagement zone to be set up that didn't include all the territory that Israel had captured. It included, it included all the territory that Israel captured, but the demilitarized zone that resulted from that is smaller. So Israel's reoccupied the demilitarized zone and in a little bit more in the north, not quite what it had in 1974, but still there, because it's arguing that the Syrian government doesn't exist. And the UN disengagement agreement with whom they signed the Syrian government does no longer exist. There's no agreement anymore. And that, moreover, the Syrian government that did sign it has been attacking Israel relentlessly over the last 15 months, shooting missiles, rockets, and trying to penetrate Hezbollah terrorists through Syria. So essentially, it's dead. The Israelis took it over. So now the danger is that there's going to be a UN resolution declaring the territorial integrity of Syria. And it's a backdoor way even for questioning Israel's presence in the Israeli side of the Golan Heights, the area that President Trump recognized as part of Israel. So there's a very real danger of that. There's also a very real danger of using the Palestinian issue and so forth. Once again, there's nothing really on the table to prevent the United States from a Palestinian state declaration. There may be some subtle agreements with Israel, but this administration can betray those, especially if Israel holds firm on some of the ceasefire talk demands. They may use that as leverage. So, of course, there's that basket. The third is they may recognize this Islamist government that's arising in Damascus which fundamentally transforms the Middle East. If you do, it brings Turkish power throughout Syria. It is an Islamist government. You don't need to look much further than what all the minorities in Syria are saying. Every single one of them. So you can work for the BBC or for CNN, and we're talking about essentially a Jeffersonian moment of peace breaking out and human rights flourishing, etc. Or you can listen to the Syrians who actually live there, the minorities, and every single one, without exception, every single one wants out of Syria. They don't want to live under this new government because they say it's an Islamist government that will impose Sharia very quickly. So I would listen to the Syrians who have to live with the consequences of this and not to some very flowery language coming from our press, much of which is paid for by Qatar in terms of lobbyists who have influenced and penetrated places like the Washington Post through people like Shadi Hamid and so forth, really the old Adnan Khashoggi crowd who went after Saudi Arabia. So I would look the United States now beginning to pivot toward the Muslim Brotherhood under this administration and lay the foundations for taking the HTS, the Hayat Tahrir al-Shams, the new government in Syria, and recognizing it. And then secondly, to remove them from the terrorist list, not because they behaved better, but because it was politically expedient to do so if you're going to recognize the government. And then that unlocks aid, huge amounts of aid and reconstruction and rebuilding. And that, of course, the Turks and the Islamists desperately want so that they can assert their authority and prepare for the next round. That all worries me. But what worries me more is that the new strategic architecture of the Middle East is being shaped. And what is essentially the contours of it? So China, Russia aligned with Iran in this axis of evil over the last 2 decades, really. And they essentially, by October 7th, had seized the strategic initiative. The attack on Israel was the beginning of the acute phase of pressing their strategic advantage and momentum and bearing down on Israel and delivering essentially a fatal blow that then, with cleanup, war of attrition over a few years, leaves Israel limping and eventually destroyed. The United States' strategic concept right after the October 7th attack literally was to restrain the Israelis from winning. This is already on October 7th. The United States issued, the first reactions were to issue restraint on all sides. This is after Israel's been attacked, 2,000 people killed or taken hostage, and they asked for restraint. And then the United States opposed every single Israeli move in Gaza, moving forward on the ground, and they became increasingly dangerous in the reactions that the United States took to stop Israel, ending up in essentially an arms embargo. So the United States essentially was allowing that strategic momentum by Iran to build. We essentially sided with Iran strategically. We may have dumped weapons on Israel at the beginning, not toward the end. But strategically, we didn't want them to use it. We wanted them to be defeated, more or less. I mean, the practical, I'm not saying we wanted them to be defeated, but I'm saying that the practical result of our policies inevitably would lead to a long-term Israeli defeat. And the strategic momentum wasn't taken away from Iran. What happens here now is Israel did what it had to do, and Iran is going down. I don't believe that we are this is not over. Israel's still going to strike the Houthis, and it's still going to strike Iran. And it's really after the regime now, not just its nuclear program. It's also after its nuclear program, but the regime. But that means the Chinese and Russians, the Russians are in a very bad place. They had to remove, because of the collapse of Syria, their strategic bases on the coast of Syria, which were critical for their resupply of North Africa. So now they've moved some of those assets to Libya, but it's really questionable whether Russia could continue to hold its positions in North Africa the way it has. So a vacuum is being created. And what fills that vacuum? Well, this is where it's very interesting. I think you see the Russians and Chinese may split. because on one side, Turkey's a big threat to Russia. Turkey has taken over Syria, and Russia feels betrayed that there was a deal not to do that, and Turkey went back on it and did it. The second thing is Turkey has tremendous assets in North Africa, and it doesn't really like the Russians being there. It would much rather work with the Chinese and their concept of the Belt and Road to expand Turkish influence throughout North Africa and fill the void that is being left by the Russians. So we're seeing really a Russian-Turkish strategic conflict emerging. And where do the Chinese go? Well, the Russians are aligning with India, traditionally a Russian ally when it deals with the Middle East. And ultimately, they may have to sign an agreement with Ukraine, call it off with the West, and focus on these issues. And I really don't know if Putin has it within him. But he essentially begins to strategically cooperate with China, because Turkey and India are in a really a Cold War, almost hot war. Turkey has been undermining India by trying to incite an uprising among its 200 million Muslims, as well as unrest in Jammu and Kashmir. So they're really at loggerheads in a very hot war. And China naturally would side with Turkey against India, and Russia with India against Turkey. So you're seeing the strategic architecture shift. And Syria has become essentially the dumping ground or repository for all the region's Islamists that the Turks have salvaged, including the Uyghur Chinese Islamists. So the Chinese like that. They like the Islamists fighting the Israelis, fighting the West, fighting Jordan, fighting the Kurds, rather than coming back to China. So in many ways, the Turkish-Chinese alliance becomes critical. And what I'm afraid with this administration going out is that they essentially punt and side with Xi, not against Russia, but essentially they begin to recognize the strategic architecture that China is beginning to set up via Turkey, the Islamists, China, the Asian countries of the Turkic Asian countries, all the way spreading into Africa, where we already see the Great Lakes belt under Chinese Belt and Road control, essentially through railroads and funding, and now debt. The huge debt has imprisoned a lot of these countries. You're going to see it move north, and the Sahel region will slowly fall under Chinese control as well, where it links up with Turkish influence. So I think what you're seeing here is that's how the strategic architecture of the region's changing. And on one side, I'm not sure this administration even understands it. On the other side, their sympathies will lie now more with the Muslim Brotherhood, having failed in their effort to build up Iran. My sense is that this progressive crowd will settle in now slowly on the Turkish Muslim Brotherhood Chinese alliance. And you see it already with the way Ilhan Omar has played with the Qataris. Qatar is the critical funder of a lot of this. So you really see this whole alliance, Turkey, Qatar, and China, essentially challenging the West's allies, which are critically threatening Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Israel, possibly Egypt. Egypt may not choose the West side on this, by the way. They may side with the Chinese. So we have this new architecture, and this administration, I'm afraid, is going to work with Xi in these last few weeks to try to move America and lock it into this new concept.
David, thank you very much. This is a comprehensive overview of a complicated and dynamic situation, the elements of which deserve a considerably longer treatment than we're able to give them today. But thank you. This is important as well, as have been our other presentations. The final one is going to come from John Guandolo. He is a former special agent in the FBI who specialized in counterterrorism during his final time there. A veteran of the Marine Corps Force Reconnaissance Special Forces elements, essentially, as well as a consultant these days on national security matters, specializing in training those at particularly state and local levels, both governmental and the public at large, about challenges that we're facing, potentially of a very kinetic kind, from some of these hostile forces at work, both from abroad and here inside the United States. I had an opportunity to talk with him for our television program that will be probably airing tomorrow, but we asked with his permission to provide you an edited selection, a fillet, if you will, of some of his most important points about what is making this a particularly dangerous time in, yes, the various ways we've addressed to this point, but also in terms of quite possibly physical violence as well. Let's go to John Guandolo's video at this point, please.
Thank you, Frank, for including me in this discussion. And I guess the first place I always like to start is, why do I believe that we are in a very dangerous time? And then what do I see unfolding here? And let me just say, the same issues we had in 2001 and 2 are present right now, but they're much, much worse. The problem continues to be a federal government, civilian and military, state governments and local governments, and you could throw into the mix the citizens as well, who do not understand these threats. And if you're in a position in the government where you've sworn an oath to the Constitution, you have a duty, a legally binding duty, to know all enemies, or at least do a due diligence effort to know all enemies. So I guess I'll begin with, what are those threats? So you have a massive Islamic movement in the United States, and we're only going to focus, because of your line of discussion here, on the United States. You have a massive communist movement in the United States, and these movements, capital M movement, have doctrine that drives what they do, published strategies, hundreds of lines of operation, and thousands of organizations that are well organized and well funded, executing on those lines of operation on a daily basis. They are, the communist movement in the United States has been operating for over 100 years, the Islamic movement working over 60 years, and they are literally culminating their efforts in the United States right now. So to think that they would merely surrender and shrink back because of an election, I think is, I don't know an adjective that describes it, but certainly naive and dangerous would be on the table for describing a mindset that thinks our adversaries, when they're literally at the peak of everything they've worked for, would merely shrug their shoulders and say, oh, well, the other guy won, I guess we just wait for 4 years. That is not where they are in their cycle of preparation in this war that they are both waging. And in the United States, the Islamic movement and communist movement are working seamlessly at the local level, at the state level, and at the national level. And so let's look at it from the strategic international level down to the local level. You had several years ago the Islamic Republic of Iran enter into a stated partnership, strategic partnership with China. You at the U.S. national level. So again, communists and jihadis working together, Iran being the largest state sponsor of global terrorism. You've got at the national level, before the 2016 election, the leader of Hamas in the United States, Nihad Awad, speaking at a Muslim Brotherhood conference, ICNA-MAS, the Islamic Circle of North America, Muslim American Society, saying Black Lives Matter is our matter, right? Their campaign is our campaign. So Black Lives Matter, created out of the largest Chinese Communist Front organization in the United States, Freedom Road, socialist organization, which is Communist Liberation Road, was always a Chinese communist operation, still is today. You've got at the military level, ISIS, now the Islamic State and Al Qaeda, working with communist organizations, where you've got, we know as a matter of fact, you have from the FBI itself in unclassified publications that were literally put into a book, that you've got members of Antifa traveling overseas to Europe to meet with Al Qaeda and ISIS leadership to discuss training overseas and in the United States in a whole range of things, whether it's bomb making or whatever, and down to the local level. And here's the key. So they're working together. Either one of these movements, the Islamic movement, the communist movement in the United States, could literally bring this country to physical and kinetic war, which I would argue we are already in, but not to the degree that would make people understand that. But remembering that the vast majority of this war is in the information battle space. So their control of information, propaganda, psychological warfare is the biggest part, but it's not the only part. It's the non-kinetic where they are engaging us in espionage and counterintelligence, in all of this. And there are pieces in our society that are being handled in this war against us by different parts of these movements, as well as the people supporting them. Everything that they're saying and doing demonstrates that they're going to do everything they can to ensure that there is not a peaceable transfer of power in the United States. They are intent, and all the intelligence we have says that we know right now Al Qaeda is planning attacks inside the homeland right now. And the clear work that Mr. Biden is doing with our adversaries, China and the jihadis, right out there in the open, is really, these are all the clear evidence that we need to understand that they are not going to go quietly. I believe that between now and scheduled inauguration day, I would expect our adversaries to do what they said they're going to do. And I pray that it doesn't happen, that we get to inauguration day and everything's peachy keen, but that does not seem to be what's on the horizon.
I'm going to some very sobering concluding thoughts. We are running very long, and I appreciate both the time of our speakers as well as our audience. And I want to thank our friends at Steve Bannon's War Room. Grace Chung, I understand, is streaming this, so we have a considerably larger audience than we might otherwise. And we ask for your patience for a quick lightning round, if I may, of questions to our various presenters, as I think there's some things that we do need to sharpen just a little bit. When we talk about these Chinese nationals coming into the United States in numbers, seemingly in units, wearing similar gear and so on, it's my understanding that the previous protocol, I think inherited from the Trump years, for processing those people was a rather, well, at least relatively thorough vetting process. Some said it would take 4 hours or so per individual to try to establish their identity, where they're coming from, what they're here for, and so on. Could you talk about what I understand is a considerable reduction in the depth of that kind of investigation or conversation even with these guys under the Biden administration?
Yeah, well, it's as you said, it's considerably less. In some cases, almost non-existent. And it really just became an issue of scale and magnitude. The numbers that we were seeing, in particular in places like Tacoma, California, coming across, they were getting thousands per day at one point. And interestingly enough, that was one of the locations that was targeted by the Chinese nationals. And if you go across the border, every location is slightly different. Some of that is based on where the people are desiring to end up. So a lot of the Chinese nationals are coming to California. That's where they want to be. You also have them going to the north and coming in south. But some of that is also cartel driven. So depending on where they want to, where the cartel, whether it's the Gulf Cartel, if they're in the Gulf Cartel pipeline going up into Brownsville, Texas, or if they're in the Sinaloa Cartel pipeline. But From what we've gathered, it's outside of biometric screening and you failing, you triggering the next level security questioning. It's almost non-existent. So we're having thousands and thousands of thousands of Chinese coming across, and again, dumping their IDs. I've got bags full of IDs, including from China, where we've interviewed the people that were coming across, and they have told us specifically that they were told by the NGOs as they were coming up through Mexico that they have an easier time coming in if they don't have an ID. And what we know is, in certain countries, unless we have information on them specifically, we obviously don't share information with China. There's many countries like Sudan and Northern Africa, the Middle East, that we don't share information with. Very, very difficult to ascertain who the people are, why they're coming, what their intentions are, what their backgrounds are. And again, from countries we don't share information with. So it's incredibly concerning. And I've spoken to people actually inside the jungle of Panama, going through the Darien Gap, Chinese Christians. Speaking of the Christians that want to escape Syria, there's basically two channels of people coming out of China. It's those that are trying to escape the CCP and are coming with potentially legitimate asylum claims, and those working for the CCP or for the triads or for these other criminal organizations. So it's just, that portion of it, Frank, is just one portion of the threat to America. We have basically thrown national security out the window to the point where, I've shown this before. I think I've talked about it on your program, where you can tag your own bag as you come in illegally through the Border Patrol. The Homeland Security leaves bag tags out in places like Yuma, Arizona, because they're getting so many people coming through that you can literally tag your own bag and wait for Border Patrol to show up, and then you would be handed off to the NGO within about 24 hours. So, and that's not 24 hours of questioning. That's 24 hours of holding you till they could find a bed for you to hand you off or find a flight for you. The bigger concern, though, Frank, is not the ones that we have in our custody. It's the ones that, again, that don't want to get caught. Somebody coming from the CCP, somebody coming intentionally to undermine America, more than likely, unless they know they're going to pass background checks if they get scrutinized, are simply going to walk across the border with camouflage and be trafficked into, wherever they want to go in our country. That's the bigger concern, or the tens of thousands that have come across. And this is the really alarming thing to me is in talking to Border Patrol, because we have hundreds of miles of completely unsecure border now, because we've taken Border Patrol and Customs and Border Protection off the line to process fake asylum seekers. Anyone can basically get in. There's hundreds of, I could take you to places in Mexico and just simply walk you across and know with certainty that nobody's going to apprehend you. That is my biggest concern. And going back, my final comments would be to some of the comments that were brought up in the last speaker and then a couple others earlier. This weaponizing of all of these, you would think that they're not connected movements, whether it's Islamists, obviously, who don't have much in common with communists other than wanting to overthrow America and the Western world. My big concern going forward is now we have all of these groups. You've got Antifa, BLM, 15 million potential illegals, now Hamas working with this Palestinian so-called movement, that are all going to be weaponized to undermine America. And then you've got the CCP and all these other interests that can simply sit back or infiltrate or influence where they want. They're already pumping money into the BLM movement. They're pumping money into Antifa. In fact, we know over this last summer at Columbia, at UNLV, at the universities in New York, that they were actually the Chinese Communist Party was funding those movements. Now you'd say, well, what does China have to do with Palestine or the war in Israel? Nothing really, except for using it as a tool to undermine America. And that's what's happening. So it's death by a million cuts in America right now. We've got all of these different America hating forces that are now in our borders working against us. And I agree with the previous speaker that I'm shocked it's quiet now. It's been somewhat quiet, but it's not quiet because they're giving up. It's quiet because they're strategizing about their next attack.
I was talking with somebody the other day who said, when my kids are quiet, something bad is being cooked up.
That's right.
These are not our children. These are enemies of the United States. Ben, thank you. I have to ask everybody to truncate your remarks a little bit just because we're so out of time, but I really appreciate your detailed understanding of this and your warnings about it. This brings me to really something that, Jim, you said an admiral had told you. We're sort of surrounded. I think what Ben has just made the point so starkly is they're inside the wire, not just on the peripheries. But I did want to just ask something. I don't think it came up in your remarks, Jim, but back in December of last year, just about a year ago, Dick Durbin, formerly the number 2 Democrat in the Senate, took to the floor of the Senate and urged that we start filling the gaps in our recruitment posture by bringing these illegal aliens into and putting them on the fast track to citizenship and so on. So I just would ask you to comment on that in connection with what you've just sort of laid out before us as to two scenarios. That one would suggest that maybe the first, that this is purposeful and is actually a true example of what's being done by this fundamentally transformed military. Your thoughts, sir?
Last year, Senator Durbin came out a speech in the Senate floor endorsing Senator Duckworth's proposed legislation to bring in illegal aliens into the armed forces. And they did that, I think, because of the low recruiting numbers that we had as a nation in 2023. They've approved a bit in 2024, but clearly there should be some examination of what kind of direction the Biden administration gave the DOD in terms of opening the aperture to increase recruiting numbers. We know that they lower standards, academic standards and other things, but I'm sure that this is part of it. And so the idea that we have Chinese nationals that came in illegally across the border or have been here for some time, deep plants or whatever, are inside our military, whether it's the Navy or other services, is very alarming and should be a cause of concern, because if they are in there, who knows what they've been working on, what they've been seeing, what they can use to disable our military capabilities in a time of crisis, or to be able to do what we've been talking about, Rob Mann has talked about with drones or whatnot, the ability to place these reconnaissance platforms, whether they're armed or unarmed, around our critical installations, not just military installations, but civil infrastructure and things of that nature that could be used against us. So, yeah, it's a real problem, and it's something that I think the new incoming administration and the new Secretary of Defense has to really take a quick and immediate, I would say, directive action against. If we want to increase recruitment, then maybe we should quit focusing on woke and DEI conferences like that are occurring up at the Navy War College here yesterday and today, where the entire faculty, student body, and professors are all locked down for 2 days in a seminar about gender equity and things of that nature.
Jim, this is the point of this webinar: this is happening after these policies have been repudiated by the American people, and it's scandalous that it's still taking place. George Racely, one of the issues that you mentioned is civil war, or Jamie Raskin talking about it. Perhaps, or at least it's been endlessly claimed by the Biden team, that the closest we've come to it since the last one was January 6th. Of 2021. When you think about what's going on here and the evidence, it'd be nice to have John Guandola's take on this too, but he's left us, that we may have in the run-up to the next certification, the same people who apparently brought us sort of a direct action exercise. We're now told there were something like 28 FBI informants in that crowd. And I think it's fair to believe that some number of them were provocateurs, and that some of what happened on that day was not a violent insurrection, but was the result of this kind of manufactured crisis. Could you comment on whether that may be in the prospect here again?
Yeah, the January 6th 2021 Fedsurrection was the lamest insurrection in world history. No takeover of the controls or levers of government. A bunch of basically grandmothers and grandfathers and young, naive political activists milling around on Capitol Hill and in the Capitol for a couple hours and then leaving. I think there's certainly every reason to believe that even much of that was in fact incited by people who were working directly or indirectly for the federal government, and hoping that this will receive a thorough airing by Kash Patel and others in the incoming Trump administration. And so the question about, well, could there be something more violent planned for the second Trump inauguration? And I think the answer to that is most definitely. And we have to understand, again, that the Constitution is seen by these people as just a little bump in the road to their quest for power. And so nothing that they might do or plan would surprise me or should be off the table.
It would probably be the left that would be engaged in a much more serious insurrection. What we've seen under this administration is very different rules apply to left and right. Another very serious assault on, I think, our constitutional republic. Peter, just a quick question to you. You made a reference to the Patriot Act and FinCEN legislation that is now hanging fire, but quite possibly will be upon us in earnest shortly, as the greatest act of surveillance of Americans since the Patriot Act. Could you give us a sense of what that surveillance would look like? And again, I'm talking about this in the context of trying to lock in arrangements that Donald Trump, when we hope gets to office, might find difficult to undo.
Well, I'm quite confused because this information is all held at the state level. There's absolutely no reason for the federal government to need this. And they're asking for documentation to be uploaded onto a brand new database. I've looked at this. There is no reason for this to happen. Surely at the state level, as has always happened until this very point, they should be able to manage and look after and report any failings in that reporting. And I worry, where are the AGs? Where are the attorney generals? Why are they not jumping up and down at this? Because this is an attack on the state. And they should be extremely vocal on this. And my other query is for those who are not involved. So if you're a financial entity, you seem to be exempt. Securities reporting issuer, you're exempt. Government authorities, of course, they're exempt. A bank is exempt. Credit union exempt. Money services business exempt. A broker is exempt. Security exchange is exempt. Investment company exempt. Venture capital exempt. Insurance company exempt. There are 23 exemptions, and it seems to be exempting the financial industry, and it also exempts 501c3s. But I would implore anyone watching who thinks, actually, I'm okay because I'm a 501c3 and this isn't going to hit me. If you do not speak up, this will come for you as well. This will come for every single entity and full control by the federal government wanting information that they have no right to take. So at the moment, a stay of execution, but I don't see any other way of describing this than an absolute intrusion and a demanding of the person information that's complete unwarranted, unconstitutional, and not needed.
Thank you. This is a powerful point on which to close. I thought I might just, as being promised it at the very beginning, offer you 6 points with respect to what we ought to be doing about all of this. None of them is a panacea. Even together, if we do all of them, I think, are we assured that we will get through this transition period, that Donald Trump will be inaugurated on time safely assume the powers of his office and begin populating his administration with people who are set on trying to right the ship, trying to undo some of the damage that we've just chronicled here, and that is ongoing in this transition. This is from the article that I published at Gatestone Institute today at gatestoneinstitute.org. I commend you to you the entirety of it. It seems to me one of the things that has to be done is, of course, what we've just done over the past nearly 2 hours. Raise awareness, educate each other about the existence of these threats and whence they come. I mean, this has got to be the starting point for any kind of corrective action, of course. Secondly, I'm mindful of the fact that with all of the surveillance cameras and other apparatuses of government at all levels, it was a fella who worked in a McDonald's who identified and turned in the apparent shooter of this health insurance executive. Crowdsourcing, in other words, information about the whereabouts and the status of potentially hostile elements, including these Chinese, apparently People's Liberation Army personnel all over the country, or the jihadis for that matter, is something that I think we have to take advantage of, the capabilities of the American people, if called to do so. See something, say something is a bit of a cliche, but we better be about it at this point, it seems to me. It falls to each of us, I think, on a personal level and as part of communities to enhance our preparedness for some of the things that we've described here today, which may be in the offing. As to the government, one of the things that it seems to me it ought to be doing is heightening the readiness, especially at the state level, of National Guard, constitutional sheriffs, other state and local law enforcement. Are they properly briefed up about the things that we've talked about here today? I'm not sure. One of the things we're going to ask you, as we always do, is that you share the information contained in this webinar, and I will close with that in a moment. We do need to protect critical infrastructure and the kinds of targets that we have reason to believe one or more of these bad actors would likely target. A personal passion of mine is the electric grid of this country, the most critical of critical infrastructures. For many years, I've been involved with a coalition we call the Secure the Grid Coalition. It's done really splendid work trying to raise awareness about the vulnerabilities and offer some constructive ideas as to what can be done about it. SecureTheGrid.org is where you can find it. SecureTheGrid.com, I think it is. Either way, you ought to be able to check it out and find out what you could do to help in this regard. And finally, we need to plan for contingencies, such as any effort from any quarter to respond to chaos-inducing events with a declaration of martial law. And it would flow from that almost certainly an effort to postpone Donald Trump's inauguration. That is a decided prospect, it seems to me, and I think John Guandolo made the case for it. So it behooves us to be, geared up, ready for that kind of argument to be made and to push back against it. So with that, let me just close again with this thought that if you have found this webinar's content to be valuable, I entreat you to share it when it is posted by our friend and colleague Oleg Atbashian. He may get to it a little later than sometimes because this has run so long. But it should be up by tomorrow, and at presentdangerchina.org. Please share it with your family, your neighbors, your colleagues at work, and particularly your elected representatives, as they, indeed, all of them, have a need to know as to what is being done in this transition and what its implications may be. I want to thank you for taking the time to take this information aboard. Point one of my 6-point plan. Let's, as I'm fond of saying, go forth and multiply. Didi, back to you.
Thank you, Frank. A video of this webinar, as Frank said, will be posted to presentdangerchina.org within a day or so of the conclusion of our event. Please share this and our other programs with your elected representatives, colleagues, and other networks. And subscribe to our Substack at Present Danger China. Follow us on X at CPD China for updates. Join us again next week for another installment of our Committee on the Present Danger China webinar series on the CCP's unrestricted warfare against America and the free world, and how the CCP captured elites betray the USA. Thanks for joining us today, and goodbye.